Hi, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Look at all these smiling faces. So nice to see you all. We'll wait just another minute, folks, to arrive. So it's always good to know who the prompt students are. And I'll have something for you in the first 90 seconds of class moving forward to reward your promptness. Why don't I ask just for, yes, yeah, favoritism. Teachers are allowed to have favorites, right? I'm looking to the teachers here on the screen. Okay. Why don't we use this arrival time to use the chat? Folks, introduce yourselves, where you're zooming in from. You don't have to drop a Heschel fact, but if you have one, you can. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Wow, look at these familiar faces. So nice to be with you all. Quick show of hands. For whom is this a lunch break? I know we have so many different time zones here. Is this a breakfast break or a dinner break for anyone? Or a playing hooky from school? Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our very first Ask for Wonder, exploring the thought and writings of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel class. Hopefully you all received my email from yesterday, unless you were a late addition in the last 24 hours to joining the class. I sent you yesterday an email with the reading that we're going to look at today, but I'm going to share my screen when we're actually in the text, so no need to have that up on your computer if you don't already. So I want to start with a Heschel story. Maybe some of you have heard this story before. When people think of Heschel, one of the first things they think of is his writing style, particularly his poeticism. And then somewhere along the way, they learned that English was like the fifth language that he learned. And, you know, all of us who think we have some skills in writing are brought back with humility to an appreciation for just how brilliant the mind and writing style of Abraham Joshua Heschel is. So really, his writing style is remarkably poetic and highly quotable. And that's a wonderful thing for Heschel, but it's also a challenge for Heschel, because for understanding Heschel, because he's so delightfully quotable, we sometimes pluck the 2 or 3 sentences that fit perfectly on our, on a poster or on a source sheet or whatever it might be, and we say, there we have it. That's what Heschel has to say about X or Y. And what it means is that rarely do we do a deep dive into the long form writing of Heschel. But there's something lost there, because Heschel is a theologian and a philosopher and a poet, and he has sustained arguments that he's trying to share. And we don't grasp the entirety of his argument if we just look at 2 or 3 sentences. So one of the motivations for teaching this class is to really spend time, not just in the quotes of Heschel, but in the extended writing of Heschel. Now, the story goes that Heschel wrote almost exclusively on 3x5 index cards, which makes sense if you think about how quotable he is. Any paragraph first existed as a 3x5 index card, and so it to some degree stands alone, because that's really how he wrote it. But the challenge of writing that way is that the coherence between one index card and the next, or if it appears in a book, between one paragraph and the next, isn't always there. Sometimes it feels like he's jumping from one idea to the next. So there's one particular essay that just really isn't clear. And the story goes that scholars are looking at this essay and they're stumped by how he's building his argument, how he gets from one idea to the next. Enter Heschel's typist, who admits that unfortunately on her way to the typewriter, what happened? She dropped the stack of index cards. All right. And while she did her best to put them back into the correct order, maybe she admitted, some of them didn't land where they were supposed to. They didn't land in the right spot. All right. So I tell you that story because you might experience that in the reading of Heschel that we're going to do together. Like a particular paragraph is brilliant, and we're not sure how he gets from one paragraph to the next paragraph. I don't think the typist, dropped all of his index cards, but it's a little bit of a window into how his mind works and how he engaged in these writing projects. Now, many brilliant scholars along the way over the last 50, 60 years, 70 years, have done their best to help people like me and you understand the depth of what Heschel has to say. The first attempt to do that was done by Fritz Rothschild in a book called Between God and Man, which is brilliantly titled, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So this book is first published in 1959. So by 1959, Heschel's major works include The Earth is the Lord's, which is actually a little bit a different style of Heschel writing. It's about the inner world of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, published in 1949. In 51, he writes Man is Not Alone. Later in 51, he writes The Sabbath, which I think many people would recognize some quotes from, and it's one of his better known short treatises. 3 years later, man's quest for God, and then 1 year later, God in Search of Man. Okay, God in Search of Man, man's quest for God, man is not alone. I think that's why Rothschild titles this Between God and Man. He didn't want to pick which direction to prioritize, so he just set it up as a two-way street, which of course I think is what one of Heschel's great claims, right? That we are both striving to be in relationship with God, and God is striving to be in relationship with us. A very Hasidic thought, which over the course of our time together, that's part of what we'll do, is we'll look at how Heschel's writing, Heschel's thought is inspired from his own personal history and roots in Hasidic world in pre-war Europe. So Rothschild, what he does in this book, which grows out of his dissertation. Don't we all wish we had a book that grew out of our dissertation? I say that, I don't even have a PhD, but I still say that, okay? So this book, which grows out of his dissertation, is an attempt to systematize, to sort of organize Heschel's thought by category or by theme. Right? And it's a very helpful book because a little bit like the Talmud, right? You open up the Talmud and you want to see what the Talmud has to say about, I don't know, Shabbat. So you think, aha, Masechet Shabbat, the tractate of Shabbat. That's where I'm going to find everything that the rabbis have to say about Shabbat. No, that's not going to be your experience. You will find some things on Shabbat there. You'll find plenty of things not about Shabbat there. And if you look through the rest of the tractates of the Talmud, you'll also find things about Shabbat. And so Heschel's writing, in a sense, is a little bit like the Talmud, insofar as he doesn't organize all of his writings on radical amazement in one place, or all of his writings on prayer in one place. So Rothschild does the careful scholarship of combing, at this point, the 5 books that Heschel has written and other essays, and organizing them by theme. My dad, Rabbi Michael Panitz, told me the following story from one of his dissertation advisors, Fritz Rothschild, okay, that when Fritz Rothschild was presenting his dissertation to his dissertation committee, when he was all done, one of the academics on the committee said to Rothschild, "You did what even God himself couldn't do. You turned Heschel into a systematic thinker." Okay, so thanks to Rothschild, I mean, I think our studying together in this class will be, my hope, a little bit more organized than just working our way through one of his great books. I think I will primarily use this book because it is organized by theme. And as I'll explain in a moment, I think that that's the right way for us to try to approach Heschel, at least in this medium here, okay, in this forum. So let's talk about his writing style for just another moment, and then we're going to actually open up the text and start learning together. Right? I mentioned at the beginning that I think Heschel is well known and well appreciated for his poetic style. And I think that his choice of this style is intentional. I think that he felt that the poetic mode was the best to elicit wonder. Not just wonder, but I'm using that intentionally. The best to elicit wonder. You can't argue someone into wonder. So he set out to evoke it. And his writing style is one of his tools meant to evoke wonder. So this class, I hope, will be a text-based class. All right, we're going to focus our learning on primary text. And like if we were learning with Rabbi Kasher, you know, the Parsha of the week, and we had all the different commentators, I want us to be very careful readers of text. I want us to delight in the language and poetry of his writing, trying to understand both what he's teaching and feel what he's teaching. Right? So it's going to be a slow reading and a careful reading. And to inspire us into that kind of reading, I want to share one of my favorite quotes. This is by a Czechoslovakian author. Has anyone here read the book Too Loud a Solitude? Brohumil Hrabal. Really lovely short book. So in the opening pages of that book, he writes, "Because when I read, I don't really read. I pop a beautiful sentence into my mouth and suck it like a fruit drop. Or I sip it like a liqueur until the thought dissolves in me like alcohol, bringing brain and heart and coursing on through the veins to the root of each blood vessel." All right, that's how we're going to try to read. Okay, sentence by sentence, and then I'll retain the prerogative to skip whole paragraphs when Heschel gets carried away. Forgive me for saying that. Okay, so one more note, you know, beware the rabbinic preamble. It's like when we get up there on Shabbat morning and we say just a few announcements and then it's as long as the sermon. That's what's happening right now, but this is the first class, so you have to indulge me in a long preamble. Heschel builds a vocabulary of terms that he constructs a theology out of. Right? Now, many of these terms are unique to him. I'll just name two. Right? Shabbat as a palace in time. And that is unique to Heschel. Right? Or the term radical amazement, unique to Heschel. But some of the vocabulary of terms that are the building blocks of his theology are the building blocks of other theologies, but he's using them in specific ways, right? Transcendence and immanence. What he means by God, who is God to Heschel, right? What is faith? What are we doing when we pray? What is wonder, right? These are terms that are central to Jewish theology over generations, but Heschel means something particular by them. So that's, I think, sort of how I imagine the project of this class, is to try to look at some of the key building blocks of his theology, the key terms, and try to understand them, and then understand how they relate to each other and build the entire project of his theology. Okay, so it's the last of these terms that I want to start with today, which is wonder, I'd like to say a blessing for our learning. This is a blessing that's traditionally recited before, cracking open a book of Torah, a sefer. It's a blessing that expresses our gratitude to the one and only for giving us the opportunity, for commanding us, giving us the chance to sanctify our lives through immersing ourselves in the study of Torah. So it's a blessing that starts, like many others, with those first 6 words, followed by Asher Kichanu Mitzvotav Tzivanu, and then it concludes with La'asok B'divrei Torah. I'll put that into the chat here. La'asok B'divrei Torah, which means to immerse ourselves in the words of Torah. So let's recite this together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. And I can't begin our learning without also dedicating today's learning in honor and in memory of the Israelis who were killed on October 7th, 1 month ago. Perhaps you all have seen today referred to as Shloshim, the 30th day of mourning for those massacred on October 7th. And I pray that the learning that we do together can be done in their honor and in their memory, and that part of our response to this moment can be to double down on our commitment to Torah and to each other and to building a Judaism worthy of what we've inherited. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm sharing the attachment that I sent to you all in the email yesterday. Let's see. So give me a thumbs up that you can see this. All right. Now I'll make it bigger. There we go. Okay. Now it's been just me talking so far, but now that comes to an end. All right. Text-based learning class can only be one voice, right? The more the merrier. And, as we begin to read and participate, and I ask questions and you ask questions and you react to things, just, invite you to remember that we are beautifully a class of 55. And it would be wonderful to hear from, as many voices as feel comfortable sharing, either by turning your microphone on and sharing or by sharing through the chat. And that some of us, immediately have an idea and want to share, and some of us, right, like that fruit drop we put into our mouth, it needs time to dissolve. And so, some of us, might want to share after taking in a little bit, and let's create space for both kinds of sharing. Okay. All right. Do I have a volunteer willing to read, knowing that when you read in any of my classes, you are also consenting to being interrupted in your reading at any point, mid-sentence, whatever it might be. So I'm only seeing a couple of faces at once. So is there someone who wants to just start?
I will.
Florine.
Okay.
Beautiful. All right, go ahead, Florine.
Among the many things that religious tradition holds in store for us is a legacy of wonder.
All right, let's pause right there. First of all, this is from God in Search of Man. And it's excerpted in this book, Between God and Man. Okay, so between God and Man, essentially, takes direct quotes, direct excerpts from Heschel's other writings, and then, as I said before, organizes them here. And then Rothschild does a little bit of, selective cutting, copying, and pasting where he thinks things would stitch better together. But the bulk of this passage is from God in Search of Man, published in 1955. I think it's a surprising first sentence. And what I find surprising, and I want to hear if you also see this as surprising, is the language legacy of wonder. Legacy of wonder. Right? A religious tradition might leave many kinds of legacies. A legacy of fidelity to the covenant, a legacy of observance, a legacy of faith, a legacy of peoplehood. But a legacy of wonder is an interesting phrase, both the prioritization of wonder and I think the insinuation by using the word legacy that wonder can be passed down or transmitted from one generation to the next. So let's start with that thought. What do you understand legacy of wonder to mean? And how might a religious tradition hold that in store for us? Now you get to bravely turn your microphone on and share. Emily. Oh, you can also use the virtual hand. That's a really nice tool that Zoom has. If you know how to use that, use it, and then I'll be happy to call on you.
It makes me think, I should say I've tried to study this before, and I was so glad when I read that you were going to be doing this class because I've struggled with it. But legacy of wonder speaks very powerfully to me of just making Shechianu all the time, right? Noticing my kids who are now 20 and 24, but they've been doing this their whole lives, make Shechianu with the first crocus, with the first snowfall, with the first of everything. And it's allowed us a bridge to that kind of wonder that I really believe is at the heart of it. And for me, that has been a very powerful way of l'dor v'dor, right? Passing it on. That's been one of my most delightful delivery mechanisms.
Beautiful. So Emily, let me just unpack what you said a little bit to make sure we're all on the same page. Right. So Emily referenced the Shechianu blessing, which is this blessing that we traditionally recite when we're doing something for the first time or for the first time in a long while. And so it accompanies all sorts of both sort of big and sacred moments, but also everyday moments that get sanctified through a blessing. And the blessing itself, thanks God for giving us life, sustaining us, and enabling us to reach this particular moment. And I think I'm so glad you brought up that blessing because it really does feel like the blessing of wonder, right? The blessing of recognizing where life has brought you to. Right? And Heschel would say, the gifts that God has given you in life. Wendy and then Mark.
I love that, the Shechianu. I think, yes, absolutely. It's those moments of pausing and recognizing that something special is happening. I think wonder has many, many parts of the legacy of our religion, in that when we wonder, it's as a sense of being in awe and looking at things as a wonderment, as not just being taken for granted, to see the wonderfulness, to see the exciting part of each thing that happens in life. As well as wonder is to question. I wonder. And I think those legacies, the legacy of not taking things for granted, of looking at the world and all of its intricacies and simple parts of life as being something very special, and also to not stop questioning.
I'm so glad, Wendy, you brought question, the other sort of function of wonder. I wonder what this means. You know, that's part of what Heschel's referring to. Elsewhere in his writing, he'll say that wonder implies a question, right? That we are being asked something, that we humans are being asked something, that wonder brings us to that realization. And then the question of religion is, how do you respond to that question? Right? So wonder is a jumping off point, both for awe and appreciation, but also for responsibility and action. Mark.
So first of all, I want to acknowledge the privilege of studying together with all of you. And thank you for that. And I look forward to it. I reread the first sentence.
Mark?
For the phrase holds in store for us. One way to interpret that is, as I'm sure we most do, holding something, when something is held in store, it means it has potential. So potentially a legacy of wonder is available through religious experience and religious tradition. But what if the word were changed to storage instead of store? And it was holds in storage for us a legacy of wonder that there is to be found inside inside all religious traditions, the potential and the lived and past experience of that tradition and what it taught people before. Mm-hmm. So in that very first sentence, Heschel starts to play with us and push us to go beyond, well, someday I'm going to get it. Someday it's going to be meaningful to me. Perhaps it's possible, but what's also possible is to look behind and look at the now and discover wonder.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. I want to orient us for a moment to what Candice wrote in the chat. If we understand wonder to be the experience or recognition that there is something greater than us as individuals, a feeling that there are phenomena that we cannot fully understand or grasp or replicate on our own, then it seems that an essential part of religious tradition is to orient the individual to see their place within the world, but perhaps not necessarily at its center. The question of what lies at the center, I think, is a key question for Heschel, to which he has an answer, right? God is at the center for Heschel, right? God is the hub, and we are the spokes. That's crucial for Heschel, right? And he writes elsewhere, I think, the greatest beauty grows at the greatest distance from the ego. Right? So Heschel is very concerned with how we transcend our preoccupation with self and recognize the ultimate reality to which we belong. And this is a little bit getting ahead of ourselves, but I think that wonder is one of the key, items in storage, Mark, right? That is going to reorient our sense of relationship with ourselves, with God, with the world, with the people who we are, fellow spokes on the wheel. Leah, and then we'll move on to the second sentence.
I think this is also about, he's introducing himself as the inheritor of a Hasidic dynasty, which was then, I think, basically destroyed. That goes back to, is it called Mezebush, the Baal Shem Tov? And these people are they were wonder workers. And the Baal Shem Tov was a particularly, I'll say, good one, because he was tough. And isn't it like a whole storehouse of stories that don't follow science, they don't follow rationality? My grandmother was a big, she had no problem with a lot of the stuff that I would say, oh, grandma, that's impossible. But so wonder lasted into certainly her lifetime.
Nice, Leah. And yes, so we're going to see throughout, right, the influence of Hasidic thought and also the Hasidic world with its cultural norms and its definitions of reality permeate Heschel's writings. I will say here, I don't think Heschel is thinking of wonder in the sense of, performing miracles or a wonder worker, anything like that. We'll see a little bit later here. I mean, he's really talking about wonder as a mode of thinking or a mode of experiencing more than a discernible action, right, that you could see someone take. Okay, Jen, is it okay to keep going, or does this? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I see there were a couple questions. I'm sorry, folks, about who didn't get the source sheet. I'm gonna share my screen though, so hopefully you're using technology that allows you to see the source sheet as I'm sharing it, and maybe also see each other, because that's a much nicer way to learn, seeing each other. All right, Florine.
Okay.
And I ask you to go back into sentence number 2.
Sure. The surest way to suppress our ability to understand the meaning of God and the importance of worship is to take things for granted. Indifference to the sublime wonder of living is the root of sin.
Okay.
Well,
now he has introduced a bunch of big terms and concepts here that we're not gonna root down into right now and try to unpack, but just to name them here for a moment. Wonder seems to be connected to, in one direction, understanding the meaning of God and the importance of worship. Wonder seems to be in an inverse relationship with taking things for granted, and a risk of ignoring wonder or indifference to wonder, the wonder of living, right, is the foundation for sin. All right, just in a sense, restating some of what he's said here. And over the course of this essay, I think he's going to unpack some of these statements. So that's why I'm tempted to let him do it in his own words rather than us as a group trying to do it right now. So Florine, can I ask you to continue reading, and then at some point I'll tap you out and I'll let another reader come forward.
Okay, sure. Modern man fell into the trap of believing that everything can be explained, that reality is a simple affair which has only to be organized in order to be mastered. Okay, I'm going to jump in just for a moment to say that, I should have said this before I asked Florine to read, much of what's going to come in the next few paragraphs is going to be Heschel's answer for what prevents us from living this way. What gets in the way of our ability to live with wonder
to be attuned to the wonder of life and God and the world around us, right? So answer number one is what Florine just read. The trap of believing that everything can be explained, that reality is a simple affair which only has to be organized in order to be mastered, right? Keep reading, Florine. I promise I won't now interrupt you until the end of the paragraph.
All enigmas can be solved, and all wonder is nothing but the effect of novelty upon ignorance. The world, he was convinced, is its own explanation, and there's no necessity to go beyond the world in order to account for the existence of the world. This lack of wonder, this exaggeration of the claim of scientific inquiry, is more characteristic of writers of popular science books and of interpreters of science to the layman than of the creative scientists themselves. Spencer and others seem to be possessed with the idea that science has got the universe pretty well ciphered down to a fine point. Could you raise it, please? I'm cut off at this
Yes,
point.
of course.
I got lost.
I don't know if you
Okay, while the Faradays and Newtons seem to themselves like children who have picked up a few pretty pebbles upon the ocean beach. But most of us find it difficult to recognize the greatness and wonder of things familiar to us. The facts of the case, we venture to say, are so wonderful that from first to last, no general impression of nature, reached along scientific or other lines, can be even in the direction of being true, that does not sound the note of joyous appreciation and of reverent wonder. Rabbi, I have a question about the third line in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Because I think it answers where we're going here. Okay, it says, indifference is sublime wonder of living as the root of sin. I quickly transferred that to the sublime wonder of creation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but that's what it looks like he's moving toward.
Yes, and we'll see later in this essay, right, that creation and nature are objects of wonder, sources of wonder for Heschel, but not exclusively, right? But I appreciate you saying that, because I think many of us, when we think about the term wonder, sublime wonder, experiences of wonder that we've had, think about natural beauty and natural phenomena. Okay, so what is one of the challenges that Heschel sees that's clearly floating around in the 1950s, right, in his historical context, although I would say still with us here today? What is it that is potentially preventing us from living with wonder? Judith?
Hello. So actually, I had a question about the second sentence. We spent a lot of time on the first sentence and kind of just mentioned the second sentence. And unless I missed it, my brother's in the hospital and I've been getting texts, so I might have missed the conversation. But I
hope your brother is okay.
Yeah, he's doing much better after 3 days on morphine. He's got pancreatitis and other stuff happening. But the second sentence where he says, understanding the meaning of God, I thought that was very interesting phraseology. It wasn't, understanding that there is God, understanding that God created the world. What's the meaning of God? That's a good question. That's I'm not, he assumes we already know the meaning of God, because he says the sentence is something about suppressing. I can't see it. It's not on the screen anymore, but it says something about, the best way to suppress, the meaning of God yeah, the surest way to suppress our ability to understand the meaning of God and the importance of worship is to take things for granted. Well, I don't know how, I mean, yeah, I think taking anything for granted impedes your ability to see wonder, but the importance of worship and the meaning of God, I don't know. I really find that interesting. Does he tell us what the meaning of God is? That comes to me of like, you know, number one, we're taking for granted that there is a God, whatever that God is. But okay, we have a God. What's the meaning behind it? Why do we have a God? That's what that phrase meaning of God says to me, like that
Right.
we're taught, you know. So I don't know. I'm not expressing myself very well,
No,
but
no,
I just
I think I understand what you're saying. So it's a little bit of a cop out what I'm about to say, which is that we will explore what Heschel means by God in a later class. We could have started there, but I instead wanted us to start with wonder. But what I will say for now is that Heschel does not doubt for a moment the existence of God.
right.
Heschel questions God's silence in the face of injustice, right? But Heschel doesn't doubt that God exists, and it's not really one of Heschel's projects to try to convince people that God exists. Heschel posits a God and then speaks about what it's like, what it means to be in relationship with that God. I think Heschel is interested, and this is a to some degree, I think, a product of arriving in the United States when he did after the Shoah, seeing his Hasidic world and his home communities destroyed by the Nazis. He comes to American soil and he takes a look at non-Orthodox American Judaism here, and he sees that the notions of God that are increasingly popular are impersonal notions of God, like Kaplan, Borovitz, those sorts of thinkers. And part of Heschel's project, part of his theology, is to reclaim or reintroduce, I should say, the personal God to American Jews, right? The Baruch Atah, blessed are you, right? The God that we can be in relationship with, not the impersonal, concept of God, but the God who man is in search of, and for whom God is in search of man. So here, the meaning of God, I don't think he's talking about proving the existence, and I don't think he's talking about a concept. He's talking about a real God that we can know and who knows us. All right. So now I wanna shift us back to the second paragraph that we read, to say that I think that the trap that Heschel is talking about is the belief that if you can explain how something works, then it's not wondrous or awe-inspiring anymore. Or that even explaining how something works, removes any notion of divinity from it. And I love what Heschel says here about, the writers of popular science book versus the, what is it, Michael Faraday and Isaac Newton, and he would probably say this about Einstein as well, right? That these scientists who know the most about science are also the ones who express the greatest wonder and awe that the phenomena that they're observing exist in the first place. Right? Don't fall into the trap of believing, Heschel is saying, that if you can explain something scientifically, it's no longer wondrous. Because wondrous isn't the explanation for what something is or how it works. It's the appreciation that something is in the first place. Okay, Sarah, Aviva Leah, Elizabeth. And then if we have time, Wendy, but otherwise I'm going to move us on.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was interesting in, again, the separation between the science writers and the scientists themselves is sort of the implication that it's in the explanation that the wonder gets lost. As opposed to the actual work of it, which I think is interesting, given that Judaism is such an oral tradition and a written tradition, religion and culture, and it's what we're doing here is explaining, right? And there's so much explaining that we are constantly doing, and it's interesting. And Heschel obviously himself is in the profession of writing explanation. So I guess I'd be interested, more about your thoughts or Heschel's thoughts in terms of, is he really arguing that this, he's trying to explain something while saying sort of like, you just had to be there, basically, like you just got to feel it yourself, because any explanation of awe is just going to water it down.
I don't think he's allergic to explaining what awe is, right? But he wants us to explain it not in a way that's the observable facts, but with the sense of what happened inside of us when we experienced what we're observing. And as a sort of a more general comment, I mean, I don't want to paint Heschel sort of with the wrong paintbrush here. I mean, Heschel is committed to Jewish practice, to Jewish observance, to Jewish learning, committed to halacha, right? And so, yes, he's familiar with and believes in a presentation of Judaism that's very much about, and how would you specifically wash your hands when you wash your hands, right? But he's also saying, that's not the entirety of Judaism, and we risk losing one of the greatest tools that we've inherited to connect with God and to appreciate our existence if we are only talking about observable facts or the details of how to perform a particular commandment. Okay, Aviva Leah.
Excuse me, sorry. This is a topic that's close to my heart because I am a science teacher. I am a science person, and that is really what I can attribute the root of my my spirituality, is that deep sense of creativity and wonder that I was able to impart to other parts of my life and really build a sense of spiritual wonderment, because just by virtue, when he talks about that the earth exists, whether you go for more of like the creation story or you like the Big Bang, it doesn't matter, because every single molecule in our bodies is also existing out in space. And when I hear Carl Sagan say that we are all star stuff, I'm hearing Heschel in that. And, two molecules never touch, ever. And there is space within those molecules of your protons and neutrons, and those things never touch, but we're still able to reach out and feel each other's warmth. And knowing these things only makes it more beautiful. That's what I try to impart on my students, because they think of it as boring, of like, I just have to memorize this. Like, no, learning how the world works is amazing. So
Aviva Leah,
Yes.
I want you to read the next. Well, I'm going to have us skip a little bit, but I'm going to read you the next section because I think it builds perfectly on what you were just saying, and I think agrees with what you were saying. So I'm going to share my screen and then show you where to read, and then Jen, we'll go to you next. Okay. All right. So all right. So, and I think I saw a question in the chat. So we are reading. This is Heschel's writing directly from God in Search of Man, but the photocopy is from Rothschild's Between God and man. I know that's a little confusing, but that's what it is. Okay, so we're going to skip this history of European thought because enough with European thought. And let's go to this top paragraph. Go ahead, Aviva Leah.
Wonder or radical amazement is the chief characteristic of the religious man's attitude toward history and nature. One attitude is alien to his spirit, taking things for granted regarding events as a natural course of things. To find an approximate cause of a phenomenon,
which I think he means proximate
okay.
cause, right? The direct sequence produces the event. I think that's what he means, proximate, not approximate.
Okay, we'll go with it. To find a proximate cause of a phenomenon is no answer to his ultimate wonder. He knows that there are laws that regulate the course of natural processes. He is aware of the regularity and pattern of things. However, such knowledge fails to mitigate his sense of perpetual surprise at the fact that there are facts at all. Looking at the world, he would say, "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes."
Okay. Does that feel like it connects to what you were saying, Aviva Leah?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just that sense of wonderment and creativity and asking why and how very much that fits into my life as being a Jewish woman, asking a lot of why and how.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out here, right? He's not rejecting science. Right? He's not rejecting the insights of science or the tools of science, right? Science helps explain the laws that regulate the course of natural processes, the regularity and pattern of things, but the awareness of those, the ability to explain something, does not displace the wonder that one feels that such things exist in the first place, that we can even be aware of those things existing in the first place. Jen.
If I understand correctly when this was written, I think I heard correctly, the biggest scientific advancement that he's writing, like in the wake of, is the bomb. And that's the thing that would most have dominated thinking about scientific advancement in the 20th century at that point, and honestly still does, in my opinion. And I think he's not just talking here about like a religious prerogative in terms of like enjoying the world or being fulfilled in your soul. He's talking about like an actual existential threat to human existence. And he alludes to that later in the text when he talks about humankind perishing. He doesn't go all the way toward it in this text, but I really think that's kind of what he's building to. And even when he's talking about European thought, he's talking also about colonialism, about environmental destruction. He's talking about real concrete things here in addition to kind of more the mystical.
Jen, can I actually have you read that short paragraph, because that's where I wanted to go next, and I think you're exactly right. And I hadn't thought about the insight of the scientific advances, right, of his time brought about tremendous destruction and disregard for human life and beyond, right? And so he has some cautionary words there as well. So let me take us back in. Thanks for jumping around. So I think maybe this, as civilization advances. Okay, please.
As civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder.
This is highly quotable Heschel right here, right? These are the sorts of sentences that get plucked and put on a poster somewhere. Let's hear Wendy. Did you want to respond to this paragraph, or was this about something earlier?
Well, I I think it's all tied in.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I think you were talking about science and factuality. And factuality within itself means period, the end. And what Heschel is saying is that we are in our relationship to God, and within us and within God, there is the notion of no end. Wonder insinuates that there is a constant yearning, there's a constant questioning, there's a constant looking outside of the box. And so I think that also is referring to science. Scientists are actually in constant wonder. How does a scientist come up with hypotheses? There are things that a scientist sees, and then from that develops questions that maybe have never been thought of before. And what Heschel is saying to us is don't stop that process. Don't understand that understanding is part of it, but understanding is like steps. There are steps of understanding. There are levels of understanding. And that happiness lies in that vast unknown.
Yeah. And great dangers abound in the forgetting of that, or the ignoring of that, or even worse. I think part of what Heschel is cautioning us, the reader, to hear is, and I think this is even clarified by the next sentence. Why does he then say awareness of the divine begins with wonder? Because I think he is sensitive to the pattern by which humans become increasingly knowledgeable and increasingly capable and increasingly destructive, and believe that they are the masters of life and the masters of existence. Because if you replace wonder with the accrual of information, if that's what it's all about, knowing more and doing more with it, then you start to believe in your own infinite power. And Heschel's very concerned about that, right? But if the goal is a state of thinking that reminds you of the divine, that reminds you that you're not at the center of the hub, right, then your whole orientation to knowledge is different. Jessica, and then somehow it's 12:58, so I'll close us.
Oh, okay. In terms of the conversation of science and wonder, I've been reading about outer space a lot, and like the James Webb Telescope recently discovered these galaxies that were formed like right around the Big Bang that defy the physics that they were using to describe the Big Bang. So, and then also like 95% of the universe is made of something called dark matter and dark energy, which scientists don't really understand. So even the science we have actually invites a lot of wonder and questions, and like isn't answerable all the time. So I just thought that's what I was thinking of.
Right. So that's the orientation to science, Jessica, that I think, Heschel is steering us towards, as opposed to, I think this is what I was trying to say before, as opposed to an orientation to science that has us thinking more and more like we are masters of the tools of creation and we have become God. Right? Now, I think Heschel wants to remind us that just because you can explain how something works doesn't mean that you've touched the root source of that thing in the first place. And our ability to responsibly be in relationship with the world is dependent on an orientation towards living that's less about mastery and more about appreciation. Okay, so this, my friends, concludes the first experiment in learning Heschel with 55 people over Zoom, oriented around a primary text that we're trying to read together, in which every sentence and every word invites philosophical discussion and questions. I thought we were going to get through the whole essay, silly me. So I will send you all an email before the next class to figure out if we're going to pick up where we left off, which I think is what we're going to do, or if we want to start somewhere else. But thank you for showing up this afternoon, or whatever time zone it is, to begin our journey together of exploring the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel, and maybe spend some time looking at the stars tonight, if you can. That might be his experiential assignment for you all. All right. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.